Shaking hands at the APEC summit in Vietnam. But the White House says so far there are no plans for a formal sit-down, saying, quote, there is no formal meeting or anything scheduled for them. Now, they're going to be in the same place. Are they going to bump into each other and say hello? Certainly possible and likely. Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters is a Fox News strategic analyst. Colonel, how do you think things are going so far? I mean, first of all, do you expect this meeting to happen between the two of them?
Well, Vladimir Putin is going to certainly try to corner President Trump at the dinner. It's very important. The Russians really wanted this formal sit-down meeting behind closed doors because Putin watched. I mean, they were aware that there was going to be a love fest between President Trump and President Xi. Vladimir Putin thinks in historical terms. In the Great Patriotic War, which we call World War II, the big three were Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin. Today, in Putin's view, the big three are Trump, Xi, and Putin. And Putin didn't want to appear to be slighted after the Xi meeting in Beijing. He wanted his sit-down with Trump. Fortunately, it appears that Trump's senior staff members realize that the optics of a closed-door meeting with Vladimir Putin right now would be very bad for President Trump. And so at most we'll get the two of them in a corner with translators talking for a little while. So smart for President Trump, hurts Putin. And Putin, by the way, although he's an autocrat, he wants real popularity at home. He wants to be seen as the big guy. They've got presidential elections coming up in March in Russia, and they're important to him. He's going to win, but he wants a legitimate win.
Well, certainly, you heard the White House say it's certainly possible that meeting will take place and likely. So we'll see where that goes. In the meantime, as to what exactly would be discussed, Lindsey Graham weighed in and said this is what he would not ask Vladimir Putin. Watch.
Russia's interjected itself into the North Korean debate, try to have some leverage. If I were Trump, I wouldn't ask for Putin's help on North Korea. I'd put him on notice that we find out that we believe that you're undermining the effort to control North Korea. Knock it off.
What do you think about that strategy?
Well, I think Lindsey Graham is exactly right. Putin is our enemy because he chooses to be. He undercuts us wherever he can. He's helping North Korea right now. He's also, of course, trying to push us out of Syria now that Islamic State has been defeated. He's helping Iran. And, of course, he's still messing around in Europe and European elections. So I think it's just, I mean, President Trump, I'm very glad that he listened to his advisors and has ducked the formal meeting. He may not be able to evade an informal one at the dinner, but the important thing is for us not to give Putin credibility he hasn't earned. I know you're saying there's been more positive with the president's trip so far than negative. It's a long trip. He still has a long way to go and a lot more to accomplish. But one area of concern, one thing you did not like that you saw, was his talk on trade, saying he doesn't blame China for our trade problems. Well, the president had a really good visit to Japan, a really good visit to South Korea. He stayed on script. He appeared statesmanlike. Then in Beijing, President Xi, the Chinese study us and Trump very, very closely. They know that Trump likes pomp and circumstance. They rolled out the bright red carpet. And so Trump ad-libbed, and you got that remark, a very dangerous remark about not blaming China for our trade problems. Well, China is indeed to blame for hundreds of billions, if not over $1 trillion of American intellectual property theft, for extorting proprietary information from us, for dumping. China is the bad guy in the trade. All right, Colonel Ralph Peters, great to have you on this morning. Thank you, sir.
Now, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump have just exchanged handshakes at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in Vietnam. They're now at a gala dinner where much anticipated, though informal, talks between the presidents could finally take place. Well, RT's Ilya Petrenko joins me live from the APEC Forum in Da Nang. Ilya, now, we understand that hands have touched. Tell us all the details.
Nikki, yes, let me tell you how it actually happened. The heads of state were already lining up for the so-called family photo ceremony wearing traditional Vietnamese outfits, and Mr. Putin was already standing in front of the cameras. Then Donald Trump came in. He approached Vladimir Putin, shook his hand, and they were standing right next to each other for the actual photo. Another thing that I noticed at the actual dinner table, the gala dinner that you were talking about, on the hosting leaders' right and left, we saw the Chinese leader Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, of course, and Donald Trump was sat somewhere on the opposite side. So that's it. The handshake happened. It did take place, but there was no formal meeting or talks between the presidents of Russia and the U.S., something that many people here at the APEC summit in Da Nang, Vietnam, really expected. I can tell you that both Russian and American journalists were on the brink of, so to say, harassing officials on both sides about that formal meeting, but it didn't take place. Maybe some other time.
OK, thanks for that. That's RT's Ilya Petrenko. Of course, everyone's going to be reading into body language, where people were standing for that family photo, and like you said, where they were sitting for that gala dinner. But for now, thanks. That's Ilya Petrenko.
The president in Vietnam. The president is at the Asia-Pacific Economic Summit. Jim, we saw President Trump and President Putin face-to-face today.
That's right, Wolf. And the big question of this trip for President Trump on this day is, will he or won't he have a formal sit-down meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin? Earlier in the week, the White House said the president expected to talk with Putin about North Korea. Now the world may see little more than just a photo op of these two leaders.
Donald Trump.
After raising expectations of a critical meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin at the APEC Economic Summit in Vietnam, the two men may only make time for this, a quick group photo with other world leaders. The White House says both sides are running into trouble finding time for a meeting. As a frustrated Kremlin spokesman put it, in theory, they could travel to Mars together tonight. Life is a bit different. Let's wait and see. Administration officials who had said the president wanted to call on Putin to ramp up the pressure on North Korea are now hedging their bets.
Clearly, the leaders are going to be at the summit together. Wouldn't be at all unusual if they ended up with some kind of a pull aside. The question is whether we've got sufficient substance.
But a meeting with Putin would also highlight a mushrooming political problem for the president back home, the Russia investigation.
That, I think, is keeping President Trump from formally having a meeting, because he's going to have to talk about that to the press, and he may not want to upset President Putin because he's going to have to be strong.
Overshadowed by events back in the U.S. throughout this trip, from the Texas church shooting to the Virginia election defeat for the GOP, and now the Roy Moore allegations, the president is trying to change the subject, continuing his calls for fair trade deals. But even on this winning issue with his base, the president is changing his tune, all but forgiving China for its trading practices.
The current trade imbalance is not acceptable. I do not blame China or any other country, of which there are many, for taking advantage of the United States on trade. If their representatives are able to get away with it, they are just doing their jobs.
That's a far cry from how he blasted China in the past.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
The president vowed he would be tougher on trade than his predecessors, though he didn't lay out exactly how.
We are not going to let the United States be taken advantage of anymore. I am always going to put America first, the same way that I expect all of you in this room to put your countries first.
The president paid tribute to Vietnam War veterans who gathered in Da Nang, where Mr. Trump remembered the sacrifices made at this once crucial battleground, touting his administration's efforts to build up the U.S. military.
I got to know them for a few minutes up front, and they are definitely tough, smart cookies. We like them. I think they like me, too. I'm not sure, but I think. No, I think they do. I think they do. I think they see what we're doing for our military.
And at this point, the White House is all but ruling out the chances of a meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said reports of a sit-down were, quote, wrong, and asked for an explanation. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, blamed the, quote, pencil pushers working for President Trump. So it seems, Wolf, the Kremlin wants a meeting, the White House doesn't. Wolf?
We'll see what happens. All right, Jim Acosta, thanks very much. Let's get back to Congressman Jim Himes. Were you surprised, Congressman, that President Trump did not meet formally with Putin, at least so far in Da Nang, as had been so widely expected?
No, I'm not really surprised. I mean, remember, Wolf, these big public meetings are done for public consumption, right? If we have something that is real, that is problematic, that needs to be negotiated, these don't happen at, big, formal, presentationally oriented meetings with press there. That happens because you want to send the signal that, a negotiation has succeeded, that there is actually progress being made. I'm not sure that at this moment in time, coming on the heels of the Manafort and the indictment and the guilty plea by George Papadopoulos and the stories coming, I'm not sure that it serves the president politically particularly well to be photographed sitting next to Vladimir Putin, or to be, to have to listen to the shouted questions from the press that undoubtedly would accompany that meeting. So no, I'm not surprised that this is not going to happen.
But there are some major issues on the national security front. The U.S. is interested in getting Russia's help in dealing with North Korea, in Syria, in Ukraine, Crimea, and certainly, I don't know if the president will raise it if they were to have a meeting, Russian involvement, meddling in the U.S. presidential election. These are important issues.
Yeah, and they may be being discussed behind closed doors, because that's the way those things, when they happen in a real way, usually are discussed. Again, these big public meetings are usually done mainly to send a signal to the public. I'm not sure that it's in the president's political interest to get photographed sitting right next to Vladimir Putin right now. And look, there's lots of things we need there. We need Russian cooperation on, the ones you listed.
Shaking hands at the APEC summit in Vietnam. But the White House says so far there are no plans for a formal sit-down, saying, quote,